Hello HEMA friends and welcome to this new video. So in these days I had a lot of spare time and I had of course a lot of time to play computer games, which I really enjoy. So today we are watching Mordhau. I have already made a review of this game back in the days, which you will find linked in the video description and at the end of this own video. Now we are going to watch some weapons that we see in this game, and I will analyze the weapon accuracy, the historical accuracy of all these weapons, and sometimes even the effectiveness of some of them. So let's start instantly. Let's pick up one of my favorite guys. This is a generic Johannes. Let's pick Galeazzo d'Amanto. So let's start, of course, with the weapon that this bad guy have in hand, which is the Pollaxe. So, of course, we cannot check all the weapons in a single video, because in these games there are a ton of weapons with a ton of skins. So I will try to analyze all the skins, or almost all the skins of every weapon that I can, but of course we will not analyze all the weapons, at least in this video. So, the Pollaxe. Now let's start with the head of the Pollaxe, which basically the spike, not the entire head. Well, the first two spikes are the best one in terms of effectiveness, and also I will say in terms of historical accuracy. Now I don't say that there is not around a spearhead like this on a Pollaxe. Probably I am quite sure that there are some of them with this shape, but in terms of the general use of the Pollaxe, the first two are better, and in fact this spike represents the weapon in a better way in my understanding and in my opinion. So they are all three okay, but the first two are better in my opinion. So the head, we see in general on the Pollaxe, as you can see, quite late Pollaxe head. Now all of them are okay, so I like all of them, and they are historical, but as I said, all of them are quite late. Now there is not a good representation of the standard Pollaxe, medieval Pollaxe, that basically is a really long Warhammer. So it's a two-handed Warhammer in some ways, and which is something we see even depicted on some manuals, like Fiore, for example. So it misses the basic medieval shape, but on the other way, I will say that it's quite good. So the shaft is basically a shaft. So there is not a lot to say. There is I will say that there is not a cool grip. Like this is the basic one, in which there is something wrapped around the stick, which, well, I don't know why you should have it, in my opinion. Now sometimes you have to move your hands up and down the shaft, so it doesn't really make sense, but it looks medieval probably. At least in their understanding, not in my one. Yeah, here we have other like nails on the shaft, and here we have other something on the shaft. I would say that the basic idea of the Pollaxe is really good. There are some minor flaws, and well, that's it. So let's jump to the next weapon. Let's get back. Let's start from the top. So the short sword. Now, in generally in HEMA, you probably already know, we don't have, let's say, we don't have difference between arming swords. So every arming sword is an arming sword. There are shorter arming swords, longer arming swords, and whatever. But in general, when you refer to them, is arming swords. So this is an arming sword which is kind of short. So let's check as if it let's say represent a short arming sword in some way. So we have 3 different blade shapes. The first one and the last one are in some ways representing the type 14 blades in terms of medieval weapons, and the last one may represent also the Cinque Dea, which sometimes is defined as a dagger, sometimes as a short sword. I don't know. I think that is a Cinque Dea. Sometimes people spell Cinque Dea, but when you have the C without the H in Italian is cinque. So not chi, is ci. Cinque Dea. So these weapons here may represent a type 14 or a Cinque Dea, this blade, sorry. This one should represent a type 15 blade shape. But well, there is in general there is not the full. I would say always, if we follow the Oxshot typology, there is not the fuller in the middle. And the first one, it represents another shape of type 14, but again the fuller is too long. But these are let's say minor flaws. I would say that it represents more or less a medieval short arming sword. So the crossguard, now this one is horrible. It may represent some kind of I can't remember the name. It's like a Landschnet sword. It's like I can't remember, sorry. But it's like a Landschnet one-handed sword. Kind of guard, but it's poorly made and well, it's terrible in my opinion. So this one is almost it may be realistic, probably it fits I would say that it fits the Cinque Dea kind of project in terms of creating a skin. So it's let's say that it's okay-ish. This one, now you know, if they had decided to make a simpler kind of crossguard, it would be better. This one is kind of ugly, like it's really short, and it has a weird angle. So it's not rounded, it's not flat, it's not really at an angle. It's basically midway between a rounded and at an angle. So yeah, it's not really common as a shape. I don't think I have seen like a crossguard made it in this way on an arming sword, but maybe there is, but I'm quite sure that there is not this kind of shape. So I don't really like it. So the pommel, now this one again should fit the Cinque Dea kind of scheme project, but it's ugly and it's a bit poorly made, so it doesn't really represent the real thing. It only gives the idea of the thing. So well, not really good. The basic one has the pommel that in general you find on not arming sword but side sword. So is a kind of a late pommel. So you don't really see a lot of this pommel on medieval swords. I would say that in general you never see this kind of pommel on medieval swords. It's is more something that you find in the later periods. But of course, I'm not always being 100% sure of this thing is not that easy, because there are a huge number of findings. So I am talking about the findings that I have seen in my life. So maybe there is a finding or two or three of medieval sword with this pommel shape. but in general you see this pommel shape on later swords, so I don't really like it on this kind of sword. It doesn't even fit the Cinque Dea, because the Cinque Dea grip is more or less as I've said this one. So the last one is the perfect one if you want to represent a medieval sword. In theory you should represent decently like a Type 14, but sadly the crossguard is not the best. So let's jump to the next weapon. Whoa, the training sword. So the training sword is basically a Regenye model of a Featherschwert. Really, it is basically the standard Regenye model of Featherschwert. Now it's we don't have medieval findings of training sword. We know that they existed because we see depiction images of this kind of instrument. Now we see even in the only depiction that we have of what we think or what it seems is Lichtenauer itself, himself, the let's say most important German master in terms of course of Lichtenauer tradition. We see a Featherschwert which is hanging. No, he have it in his hand, maybe. Yes, if I remember well. And we see this kind of more or less this kind of tool, but it's not shaped in this way. So this one is basically a modern tool in a medieval game. So a modern training tool. We don't have other skins for this, so we can only buy a Regenye Featherschwert on this game. So the rock is we should buy the rock just to see if we don't have different skins for the rock. I am really sad, but I think that it represents well a medieval rock. Also some modern rocks, but I am not quite sure. So let's go forward. So just one word, the Warhammer. Let's see if there is a good so our Warhammer head like this one on a Pollaxe. It would be super cool, like having the option of putting this kind of head on one of the Pollaxe that we have seen in, of course, the Pollaxe. It would be cool because it would represent more or less a medieval Pollaxe, but well, we don't have it now. I would say that even the hammer part, the left part, it could even be more simple to represent like the average medieval Pollaxe. But even like so, it would be really cool to have it. Have the option to put this kind of head on the Pollaxe, but sadly we don't. We can't. So the other Warhammer heads are cool. In general, if I remember well, the Warhammer is in generally well made. Yeah, yes. I would say, like this one, really interesting. Really, I would say that is kind of realistic. Is really well made. The first one is really well made, simply because it's simple. And in this case, the wrapping at the end makes sense, because here you don't have to move the weapons, the ends on the shaft. You simply have to grip it in a strong way, so this kind of wrap makes sense on this weapon. Like this one is the less realistic, I will say, because now you have this big chunk of metal, which doesn't really make sense. Now it makes only the weapon heavier, and on the part which it doesn't hit the opponent. Now the good thing of the hammer, you see, this one is more realistic because of course here you have all the weapon made of iron. So in this way you cannot have problems of the shaft that breaks breaks on while hitting on one opponent in armor in a, let's say, maybe wrong way or whatever. So you see this of course in late Warhammers. You have all the weapons made of iron, so you have lesser problems during the fight. You may incur on lesser problems during the fight. While this one is more simple, and as I said before, it's okay. This one is halfway between the two, and try to represent something which really, to me, it doesn't make sense, because if you put the weight of your Warhammer on let's say the grip part, you change the balance of your weapon, so you don't have all the mass on the, let's say the maximum mass on the head part, which is the thing that makes the Warhammer works. So this doesn't really make sense. So the next one, blacksmith armor, no. Bear trap. Arming sword. So the basic arming sword. Now we see the Viking, but in general we have the default one, which is which should represent a medieval sword. Now let's see the blades. We have a ton of skins for the arming sword, by the way. So this one is cool because it's basically a type 18 blade, which is made in a good way. So the type 18 is kind of laterish, and in fact you find it at the end of the medieval period and the beginning of the Renaissance one mainly, but of course you find it also in others part of history, but in general you can place it in this kind of period. It's this is probably the most interesting one. Now this one is okayish. I don't find huge problems. I would probably be more interested in seeing only a single fuller in the middle of the blade, which would represent this sword in a better way, but the double fuller is not something which you can't find in this kind of weapons of different types, of different shapes. So it's okay. This one is okay too. Is well, I think that the blades, the medieval blades of these weapons, of this weapon are kind of good. So the blade, the crossguard. Now this one is just a little bit bulky, in my opinion. Making it a little bit thinner would fit a little bit more the weapon itself. But let's say that it's okay because it represents an historical shape. These, of course, represent an historical shape, and this is probably my favorite one. Simple, straightforward, and you don't have problem when you make simple things like that. So this is the perfect one. So this one is okay too. In let's say it's a more, it's slightly later in terms of for the later medieval period, let's say, but it's okay. And we see also the crossguard shape on every or rain guard, as someone calls it, on every one of these crossguard, which is kind of cool. The pommels, this one is okay, and grips, of course. This is the best option that we see. Now, this kind of grip is something that you see on like Albion swords. Okay, so are modern replicas. Now, I am not a super nerd of how precisely it was made an historical grip, and I don't really know all the historical grips findings that we may find. I only know that, to be honest, I think that there are only a few left. I talk about the biological parts, so the wood, etc. Only a few of these are still, let's say, intact. because we have found a huge number of swords in like rivers and whatever. So in general, and now sometimes even in rivers the biological part remains intact in specific, really specific and special situation, let's say. But most of the times the iron remains intact, and the biological parts just go. So I don't know a lot of this the real shape. I know that there is people which is interested in this, and I try to follow them. So in my understanding, this is quite interesting and quite realistic. This one is kind of realistic. The pommel is kind of realistic too. I just say that I prefer the first one because yeah, again, it's more simple, and it represents a little bit better an historical shape. Now even this one represents quite well an historical shape, but slightly lesser. And like this one, the grip represents something historical, or at least some modern interpretation of a specific kind of historical grip. But I think that I have seen something like this, historically speaking. The pommel, I am quite sure that I have seen one pommel like this in my life, but it doesn't represent the average, the hugest number of pommels that we have around. So now I'm not sure to say this fits well the case, like having something which represents medieval weapons, but I don't am against this one. I think that is poorly made, to be honest, like the shape, but it's not terrible. Let's check only the other shape that we have. Now we have 3 different kinds of 2 basket-hilted swords, one like, I don't know, saber kind of grip with a huge bulky blade. Now for these 3 weapons, I only have to say that the blade is too bulky in basically all the cases. I will say that sometimes you find this kind of like large blade. In fact, the broadsword have a large blade, as you may understand by the name, but not every time. And here you see that from this kind of shape that the weapon is broad in every kind of sense. So it's not badly made, it's not terrible, but it's not really well made. The representation is a bit exaggerated. So this one I can't really say. I'm not interested in this kind of weapons, but I don't think there is such a weapon. Like you see this kind of grip in general in carved blades, like the first sabers and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe it can be some kind of marine weapon or whatever, but I have not seen this kind of thing, but I am not even interested in this kind of weapon, by the way. So to be honest, I don't think it represents something historical, but I can't say for sure. Viking swords, I have to buy like the Viking skin. Okay, so now so this kind of blade is even a bit too rough, and it shows like as really small fuller. Now in general this kind of blade had the fuller, and in general you can see like this blade represent a finding, in my opinion. So it gives you the idea that this blade was found in a river, basically, and was really old. But I would say that the overall form of the weapon is okay. Now this one is a little bit too a little bit too pointy, in my opinion, to represent the average medieval, Viking. We see Viking sword, but in that period of time, many, let's say 8th century, 9th century, we had a lot of this weapon shape around northern, even northern Italy. I would say even in south of Italy. In general, medieval weapons of that period looked a lot like this one, or better, like slightly more like this one. So we say Viking sword, but it's like early medieval sword. So as I said, this one is a little bit too pointy, but it's okay. You see like an inscription which is like the famous Ulfbert like in your inscription, but well, let's say that it's okay-ish with some flaws. And this one is okay-ish too, even if like the fuller is not well made. Even the edges go forward in a degree which is not really well made, in my opinion. The shape of the blade is quite poor, but it represents the genre of sword. So grips, this is okay, this is okay too, this is lesser okay, I would say. I'm not like a super expert of Viking swords. We see some kind of Viking swords with like interesting let's say grips and crossguard, let's say guards, like shaped in particular ways for noble people with golden stuff over it. So this kind of sword represent this kind of so this kind of shape represent this kind of grip, special grip, noble grip, but I would say that is made in a slightly poor way in my understanding. So last sword, we check the side, the longsword. Default, it's okay, represent like an early longsword from the beginning of the 14th century, let's say. So the default blade is okay. This sword here represent, try to represent something which you see. Now this sword, it reminds me of the Galloglass, I think is the correct name of Albion. It's an Albion sword named Galloglass, I think. This one here, now every part of it is made in a way which try to represent something historical. The grip by itself is okay. The crossguard by itself is okay. The pommel, let me rotate it only a second, is okay-ish, I will say. Yes, you see something like this is not made in this way, but almost like so. The pommel is almost historical too. The blade is historical-ish, but you have this kind of inscription, and the whole thing put together is kind of is interesting. Is almost historical, but it tries to go toward the fantasy kind of part. This you see there is basically a ricasso part of the blade here, which is kind of longer. I don't know. I will say that it's historical 7 out of 10, and then there is some thing about putting it together which is not really historical, in my opinion and in my understanding. And this one is the weirdest is just ugly, and that's it. So the crossguard is ugly. The pommel is historical. You see something like that in northern, like I would say Ireland and the Scotland weapons sometimes. It was common in the northern part of UK and in Ireland, but well, it's not something that you find on a regular basis, let's say. So it's something weird. Now the handle is terrible. It's like something which is look medieval because it's poorly made, but is really ugly. The crossguard, I've not seen this kind of crossguard in my whole life. It looks like a fork, so it's good for eating things probably. So you can cut down people, and then you go in the camp and eat your meal with the crossguard. So it's a double use sword, and the blade is just ugly. It represents something medievalish. It's not. It doesn't. It's not that this blade shape is not completely unhistorical. Okay, so it's only a mishmash of things and is poorly made, and it represents an ugly mercenary fantasy sword, basically. That's the problem. So this one really good. This one almost good. Okay, so middle way. This one terrible. So for the default skin we have 3 different blade shapes. The first one, so I like the first one. The only problem is that the fuller, in my understanding, is a little bit too long. Even if in some kind of these blades, no, I will say that, yeah, the only problem, the minor flaws that we see here is that the fuller is a bit too long, and the pommel, you see on this kind of sword here, which are kind of early, you see a pommel which is a little bit more, it's like a medal pommel, a round pommel. This kind of more or less spear shape pommel is something a little bit later. But I will say that overall this represents a medieval blade, a medieval weapon. So it's not perfect. There is also some times in which an old blade was used to make a newer sword. So people reused the old blades because as in every period of history, there is always the myth that oh, this is an old thing, so it's better. So sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's true for something. But most of the time, like if you can make steel in a better way, for example, our modern swords are better because the steel is better. That's it. So I'm not sure if the old blades were made in a better way, maybe because they were more I don't know, maybe Renaissance blades were made in a more I don't know, less refined way, let's say. Maybe not, maybe it was just a legend. But what what I can say is that this mesh of things may make sense, and overall the sword represents something historical, which is I appreciate. This blade shape is good too, and personally speaking, I even like it. I should probably use it. Let's buy it. So I like this kind of skin here. And the third one is okay too, but is a little bit. Now the first two are better in terms of shape. This one lesser, because in general you see that it has the most part of the blade, which is diamond blade shape basically. in general on this kind of swords you see all the blade which is diamond shaped, and when this kind of shape is used, the weapon is a little bit more pointy. So you see in my, even for example my Bellatore sword or my Malleus Martialis Prior di Battaglia, which are both type 15, are shaped in this way. So you see a thin or large forte and a very very narrow point, and all goes toward the point to a degree, which in the end looks like a very narrow triangle basically. So this blade is not really good because of this motivation. So yeah, that's the problem of this blade. So I like the first two, this one not really. So last things, crossguards. This one is perfect. I use this one because like it's simple and it represents something historical in a better way. This one I don't know, I have seen this kind of crossguard in some blades, so it's something historical, of course. I only think that it doesn't fit really well this kind of swords. The crossguard by itself is historical, on this kind of swords not really. So that's it. And the third one is this guy. So the third one it could be better, because now this change of shape here maybe is something that there is on a single finding, and I don't know again, but it's something that I don't really know. So I have not seen this kind of precise shape on a sword which I know. I'm not talking of the side parts of the crossguard, but of the center part, which is kind of weird. To be honest, I don't really see the motivation of this shape changing here. Is not even really cool, and it also makes your crossguard like protecting your thumb in a lesser way, because you see that there is this slightly round part here which goes back, so it doesn't really makes a lot of sense as a design. So well, the first one is good, second one meh, third one I don't really like it. But pommels. So okay, my favorite pommel is the last one, but yes, let's say that is halfway between a shift like a fishtail kind of pommel and a lantern, let's say. No, sorry, lantern, it exists as a word? I don't know. Kind of shape, but it's okay. The grip is kind of okay. It's not well made, but it's kind of okay. This one is the worst one, because the pommel is ugly made and the handle is like super ugly, and there is this changing of this change in the dimension of the handle compared to the pommel, which doesn't make sense. It will probably be super uncomfortable, so it doesn't make sense at all. So it's really, and it's also ugly, to be honest. And this one, we have seen it before, is okay. I said before, it doesn't fit completely the kind of blade shape that you have at your disposal, but I will say that is okay. It's halfway between a round pommel and a pear shaped pommel, but it's kind of okay. So we are at the end of this video, guys. We have analyzed a number of weapons, all the skins and stuff. I hope you have enjoyed this kind of video, which is kind of weird compared to other videos that I make. So of course in these days I can't go outside and do all my regular stuff, but I hope that I will be able to do it sooner than later. So go back and have my training and have my videos made outside, because I start to hate staying inside and shooting all my stuff here, which to be honest I don't find really cool, especially aesthetically speaking. But that said, I hope you have enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Remember, if you want to support my channel, check my Patreon page in the video description. Now we have a new feature, which is the Discord channel. If you join my Patreon from the soldier tier above, you may have the option to join the Discord channel and contact me directly to ask me whatever thing you want. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you next time.